Have you ever heard of a Christmas story so uneventful it's actually kind of amazing? Forget dramatic family feuds or last-minute shopping disasters. Today we're traveling back to 1952 to a small, unassuming town in Ohio that hosted what would later be known as the mildly confusing Christmas. It's a tale that proves not all holiday stories need drama to be memorable. Picture this, it's a chilly December evening. The town hall is decked out in tinsel and handmade decorations. The air smells like pine needles and fresh-baked cookies. The entire community has gathered for their annual Christmas gift exchange, a beloved tradition that brought everyone together. This wasn't some anonymous secret Santa. It was a carefully organized event. Weeks in advance, residents would drop off their wrapped presents, each with a neat little tag specifying who it was for. The town's volunteer committee, led by the ever-reliable Mrs. Gable, would then arrange them under a magnificent spruce tree. That year, the pile of gifts was bigger than ever. There were hand-knitted scarves, the latest best-selling novels, intricately carved wooden toys, and of course an impressive number of fruitcakes. The spirit of generosity was palpable. Everyone was excited. The children were practically vibrating with anticipation, their eyes glued to the colorful packages. The event began, as always, with a few carols. Then the moment everyone was waiting for arrived. The town's mayor, a cheerful man with a booming voice, started calling out names. Young Timmy Parker was called up first. He was hoping for a new model airplane kit he'd been talking about for months. He eagerly tore open his gift to find a lovely hand-knitted lavender scarf. Timmy, a boy of 10, looked at the scarf, then at his parents, completely bewildered. His mother gave him a gentle nudge, reminding him to say thank you, which he did, albeit with a very confused expression. Next up was Grandma Mildred, known for her love of mystery novels. She was expecting a new Agatha Christie book. She unwrapped her present to reveal a yo-yo, a bright red, shiny yo-yo. She blinked, held it up, and gave a little puzzled smile. She wasn't one to make a fuss. She simply thanked the mayor and returned to her seat, dangling the yo-yo from her finger as if trying to solve its purpose in her life. This pattern continued. A respected farmer, Mr. Henderson, who had hinted he'd like a new pair of sturdy work gloves, received a delicate porcelain doll. A teenage girl, Sally, who dreamed of a new diary, got a jar of homemade pickles. And then came the fruitcakes. Oh, the fruitcakes. They seemed to be everywhere, landing in the hands of people who were famously not fans of fruitcake, including the town dentist. For about 10 solid minutes, a quiet wave of confusion washed over the town hall. You could see people glancing at their bizarre gifts, then looking at their neighbors who were doing the same. There were furrowed brows, tilted heads, and polite, slightly strained smiles. You might expect this to be the part of the story where things get heated, where accusations fly and Christmas spirit dies a quick, painful death. But this was a small town in Ohio in 1952. Drama wasn't really their style. After the last gift was handed out, and a record number of people were holding items they clearly didn't ask for, a moment of collective realization settled over the room. Old Mr. Abernathy, holding a frilly apron instead of his pipe tobacco, chuckled. It was a low, rumbling sound that broke the silence. Then Mrs. Gable, looking at the box of fishing lures she'd received instead of her gardening shears, let out a light laugh. Suddenly, the whole room erupted. Not in anger, but in gentle, shared laughter. It turned out that a couple of the younger volunteers, in their haste to arrange the presents, had accidentally knocked over the box of name tags. Trying to fix their mistake quickly, they had reattached them to the wrong gifts. Almost every single one. So what happened next? Chaos? Disappointment? Nope. What happened next was peak Midwestern politeness. People simply stood up and started talking to each other. "Excuse me," Timmy's father said, holding up the lavender scarf. "I believe this might belong to Grandma Mildred." She looked up from her yo-yo and her face lit up. "Oh, my scarf." "Thank you, dear. Does anyone happen to have a mystery novel?" A calm, orderly, and incredibly friendly exchange began. The town hall transformed into a bustling but serene marketplace of mismatched gifts. "Anyone missing a jar of pickles?" called out Sally. "I've got them right here." Mr. Henderson found the owner of the porcelain doll, a little girl who was overjoyed, and soon located his work gloves. The yo-yo found its way to a young boy who had received a book on tax law. The whole process was a beautiful, impromptu dance of community cooperation. There were no arguments, no raised voices, no hurt feelings, just a continuous chorus of, "Oh, is this yours?" And "Thank you so much, I was looking for that." And "My apologies, I seem to have your fruitcake." In fact, so many apologies were exchanged for the simple, blameless mix-up that it became a running joke for years to come. Within half an hour, nearly every gift had found its rightful owner. The model airplane was in Timmy's hands. Grandma Mildred was happily reading the first chapter of her new book, and the farmer had his gloves. The few remaining unclaimed items, mostly the extra fruitcakes, were placed on a communal table for anyone to take. This event, the mildly confusing Christmas, became a cherished piece of local lore. It wasn't a story of holiday miracles or dramatic reunions. It was a story about a community that, when faced with a small crisis, responded not with frustration but with patience, humor, and a whole lot of grace. They didn't let a simple mistake ruin their evening. Instead, they turned it into an opportunity to connect, to laugh at themselves, and to help one another out. It's remembered so fondly because it was so utterly devoid of conflict. In a world that often feels full of drama, there is something incredibly refreshing about a story where the biggest problem is a surplus of fruitcakes and the solution is just being nice to each other. It's a testament to the idea that the true spirit of the holidays isn't about getting the perfect gift, but about the people you share the moment with. The mix-up actually made the event more interactive and memorable than any of the previous years. Decades later, people in that town would still talk about it. They'd say, "Remember the year everyone got the wrong present?" And they'd smile. It was a reminder that sometimes the best memories aren't the ones that go according to plan, but the ones where things go a little bit sideways and everyone decides to just roll with it together. So next time your holiday plans hit a snag, maybe think of the good people of that Ohio town in 1952. Take a deep breath, have a little laugh, and remember that a bit of confusion can sometimes lead to the most wonderful and heartwarming stories. Have you ever brought home a Christmas tree full of excitement only to realize it doesn't quite fit? It's a classic holiday hiccup, right? We measure, we eyeball it, but sometimes the tree just has a mind of its own. Well, today I want to share a story from long ago, a simple tale about a Christmas tree that was just a little too ambitious for the room it was destined for. It's a story from 1885, set in the beautiful, bustling city of Vienna during the heart of the holiday season. It's not a grand, dramatic tale, but a quiet, charming one that I think says a lot about the true spirit of Christmas. It's about a family, a tree, and a very simple, very elegant solution to a common problem. It reminds us that sometimes the most memorable moments are born from the smallest imperfections. So, grab a cup of hot cocoa, get comfortable, and let's travel back in time to a cozy Viennese parlor. Imagine Vienna in the winter of 1885. The air is crisp, the grand boulevards are dusted with a delicate layer of snow, and the warm glow of gas lamps spills onto the cobblestone streets. The scent of roasted chestnuts and spiced gingerbread hangs in the air. Inside the city's elegant apartments, families are preparing for Christmas. This was a time when traditions were deeply cherished. The Christmas tree, a custom that had become incredibly popular across Europe, was the centerpiece of the celebration. Finding the perfect Tannenbaum was a serious and joyful mission. Our story centers on one such family, the Schmidts, a respectable, middle-class family known for their love of music, literature, and of course, a beautifully decorated Christmas. That year, Mr. Schmidt was determined to find the most magnificent tree yet. He ventured out to the bustling Christkindlmarkt, a festive maze of stalls selling everything from handcrafted ornaments to festive treats. After much searching, his eyes landed on it. A magnificent fir tree, lush and full, with a proud, straight trunk and a perfect, pointed top that seemed to reach for the sky. It was, in his opinion, the epitome of Christmas perfection. He happily paid the vendor, and with the help of a delivery boy, the grand tree was brought back to their apartment on the Ringstrasse. The children, Anna and Thomas, watched with wide-eyed wonder as the enormous tree was carefully maneuvered through the doorway. The fresh, piney scent filled their home instantly, and the excitement was palpable. The holiday had officially begun. The family gathered in the parlor, their main living space, ready to erect the tree. This was a room with high ceilings, but not, as they were about to discover, infinitely high. Mr. and Mrs. Schmidt positioned the heavy iron stand in the usual spot, right by the grand window overlooking the street. With a collective effort, they heaved the tree upright. And that's when they encountered the problem. The very tip of the tree, the perfect, proud point that Mr. Schmidt had admired so much, gently but firmly bumped against the ornate plaster ceiling. It was too tall. Not by much, maybe just a few inches, but enough to be a definite issue. A moment of silence fell over the room. The children looked at their father, their faces a mixture of confusion and concern. Was their perfect tree not so perfect after all? The typical solution, of course, would have been simple. Get a saw, trim a few inches off the bottom of the trunk, problem solved, or perhaps snip off that lovely top branch. But Mr. Schmidt hesitated. He looked at the tree, this beautiful specimen he had so carefully chosen. Hacking away at its base felt brutish, and cutting off its perfect top seemed like an act of sacrilege. It would ruin the tree's natural symmetry, its inherent dignity. He was a man who appreciated form and beauty, and the thought of mutilating this lovely fir just didn't sit right with him. Mrs. Schmidt, sensing his hesitation, also looked at the tree, then at the ceiling, then back at the tree. She was a practical woman, but she also understood her husband's sentiment. Why spoil something so lovely if there was another way? Then an idea began to form. It was a quiet, unconventional thought. Instead of altering the tree to fit the room, what if they altered the tree's position? What if they didn't force it? Mr. Schmidt shared his thought with his wife. Instead of standing perfectly straight, what if they just tilted it? A little lean, a gentle angle, just enough for the top to clear the ceiling? It was an odd proposal. A Christmas tree was supposed to stand tall and proud, a perfect vertical line. A crook tree, it was unheard of. But as they considered it, the idea grew more appealing. It was gentle. It was respectful to the tree. And honestly, it was easier than finding the saw and making a mess of pine needles and sap all over the Persian rug. So they decided to try it. With great care, they loosened the screws on the heavy stand. Mr. Schmidt gently pushed the top of the tree, while Mrs. Schmidt adjusted its base. They angled it just so until the tip of the tree was no longer touching the ceiling, but instead hovered gracefully a mere inch away from it. Then they tightened the screws, locking the tree into its new, slightly slanted position. They all stepped back to survey their work. There it stood, their magnificent Christmas tree, leaning at a slight but noticeable angle. It looked unusual. It was undeniably crooked. But it was also still beautiful. The children, Anna and Thomas, giggled. A leaning tree. It was funny, but in a delightful way. The crisis was averted. The tree fit. It was a compromise, a gentle negotiation between the tree and the architecture of their home. The crooked but proud fir tree was ready to be decorated. Over the next few days, the Schmidt family decorated their leaning tree. The process was a little different that year. They had to be mindful of the angle when hanging the delicate glass ornaments and strings of popcorn. Some of the heavier ornaments had to be placed strategically to balance the visual weight. The flickering candles in their little clip-on holders had to be positioned with extra care to ensure they burned upright and safely away from the branches. But this extra attention only made the process more engaging. It became a fun little puzzle. The finished result was surprisingly charming. The slight tilt gave the tree a unique personality, a sense of character. It looked as if it were gently bowing to the family or perhaps leaning in to share a secret. It was their tree, and its little quirk made it even more special. Soon, the holiday visitors began to arrive. Friends, neighbors, and extended family came to call, as was the custom, to share holiday greetings and admire each other's Christmas decorations. As guests entered the Schmidt's parlor, their eyes would inevitably be drawn to the tree. There would be a brief pause, a subtle shift in their expression as they processed what they were seeing. A leaning Christmas tree. It was certainly not what they expected. Most visitors found it mildly amusing. A few raised an eyebrow, perhaps wondering if the Schmidts had celebrated with a little too much mulled wine before putting up the tree, but no one laughed out loud or made a rude comment. It was Vienna, after all, and politeness was paramount. Instead, they would offer a polite compliment, saying things like, "What a unique arrangement," or "How very artistic." Mr. Schmidt would simply smile and explain the small dilemma of the tree being a tad too tall. The explanation always brought a knowing nod and a soft chuckle. It was a relatable problem, and the solution was, in its own way, quite clever. The leaning tree became a quiet conversation piece, a source of gentle amusement throughout the holiday season. For the entire Christmas season, the tree stood its ground, crooked but proud. It held its ornaments, shimmered in the candlelight, and filled the room with the scent of pine. The children grew accustomed to its lean, and it simply became a part of their holiday landscape. When the time came to take the tree down in January, there was a small pang of sadness. The parlor suddenly felt very empty and very straight. The absence of the leaning tree left a void. As the years went by. The story of the 1885 Christmas tree became a beloved piece of Schmidt family lore. It was a story they told their children and their children's children. It was the year the tree leaned. What's so wonderful about this story is its gentleness. It became a favorite family memory not because it was a disaster, but precisely because it wasn't. It was a notable yet entirely manageable mishap, as the family later described it. In the grand tapestry of life, full of real challenges and hardships, the story of the leaning tree was a reminder of a time when a problem could be solved with a simple, creative, and gentle adjustment. It was a story about flexibility, about choosing grace over force. They didn't see the tree's height as a flaw to be corrected, but as a characteristic to be accommodated. This simple shift in perspective is, I think, a beautiful metaphor for how we can approach so many of life's little imperfections. We don't always have to cut, trim, and force things to fit our rigid expectations. Think about our own holiday experiences. We often chase this idea of the perfect Christmas. Sometimes all we need to do is tilt our own perspective a little. The perfect gifts, the perfect meal, the perfect family photo where everyone is smiling, but reality is rarely that neat. The turkey might be a little dry, the gifts might not be exactly right, and someone is always blinking in the photo. It's in these imperfect moments, these manageable mishaps, that the real memories are often made. The laughter that comes from a slightly burnt batch of cookies is often more joyful than the polite appreciation of a flawless one. The story of the leaning tree of Vienna reminds us to embrace these quirks. It encourages us to find the charm in the crooked, the beauty in the unconventional, and the humor in the unexpected. The Schmidts could have had a perfectly straight tree, but they would have lost a story that warmed their family for generations. Their leaning tree was a testament to the idea that the heart of Christmas isn't about perfection. It's about warmth, love, and making room for everyone and everything, even if it means things get a little tilted along the way. Have you ever noticed how some of the most fascinating stories aren't the grand, earth-shattering epics, but the quiet, peculiar little moments that get tucked away in history? Today, we're diving into one of those stories. A tale that's less about divine intervention and more about a simple, stubborn object that refused to follow the rules. This is the story of the candle that burned just a little too slowly. Our journey takes us back to the winter of 1664. Imagine a remote monastery, perched somewhere in the chilly, windswept landscapes of Europe. Snow is likely blanketing the ground, muffling the world in a deep silence, broken only by the tolling of the chapel bell and the hushed prayers of the monks within. Life here is governed by routine, by the rising and setting of the sun, and by the sacred rhythm of the liturgical calendar. It's a world of predictability and devotion, where every day is much like the last. As Christmas approached, the monastery was preparing for one of the most important celebrations of the year. The air would have been filled with a sense of quiet anticipation. Carols would be practiced, special meals planned, and the chapel decorated with whatever humble greenery could be gathered from the frozen woods. And, of course, there were the candles. In an era before electricity, candles were everything. They were light, warmth, and a powerful symbol of hope and faith, especially during the long, dark nights of winter. For the Christmas Eve service, a special candle was chosen. This wasn't just any ordinary tallow candle. It was a fine beeswax candle, a luxury reserved for significant occasions. Beeswax burned cleaner, brighter, and smelled faintly sweet, a stark contrast to the smoky, greasy animal fat candles used for everyday tasks. This particular candle was placed in a prominent position, ready to cast its golden glow over the monks as they gathered for their vigil. The service began, the familiar chants echoing through the stone arches of the chapel. The candle was lit, its flame a single, steady point of light in the vast darkness. It was expected to burn through the night, a silent companion to their prayers, and then be extinguished in the morning. But that's not what happened. When morning came, the monks were surprised to see the candle still burning. Not just flickering with a dying gasp, but burning with a calm, steady flame. It had consumed far less wax than it should have. A few monks might have exchanged curious glances, but it was a minor anomaly, easily dismissed. Perhaps the wick was trimmed unusually well, or a draft had been surprisingly absent. They went about their Christmas Day duties, the little candle continuing its quiet, persistent vigil. But then a second night fell. The monks returned to the chapel for their evening prayers, and there it was, still burning. The same small, unwavering flame. By now, this was more than a minor curiosity. It was becoming a topic of conversation. Brother Thomas might have whispered to Brother Michael over their simple supper, speculating on the cause. Had the chandler, the candlemaker, used a new technique? Was the wax somehow different? The monastery scribe, a meticulous man named Brother Anselm, decided this was an event worthy of record. He sharpened his quill, dipped it in ink, and in the monastery's chronicle, among records of births, deaths, and crop yields, he carefully documented the strange behavior of the Christmas candle. He noted its slow, almost leisurely consumption of wax. He described its faint, pleasant scent of pure beeswax, confirming there was nothing unusual about its composition, no strange oils or additives. It was, by all accounts, a perfectly normal candle behaving in a perfectly abnormal way. The monks' reaction wasn't one of awe or fear. No one declared it a sign from the heavens or a harbinger of doom. Instead, their response was one of mild, scholarly interest. This was a community of thinkers, men who spent their days in contemplation and study. A puzzle, no matter how small, was something to be examined and debated. They gathered around, observing the flame. One monk, who had once been an apprentice to a candlemaker before joining the order, suggested that perhaps the candle had been rolled too tightly. In those days, beeswax candles were often made by repeatedly dipping a wick into molten wax, or by rolling a sheet of wax around a wick. If the wax was compressed too densely, he theorized, it might burn much more slowly than usual. It was a logical, scientific explanation, and it satisfied most of them. The candle finally, gently, extinguished itself sometime during the third day. It had lasted nearly 3 times longer than expected. It hadn't produced a blinding light or filled the chapel with a miraculous perfume. It had simply lingered. Its legacy was not a new religious doctrine or a pilgrimage site, but a few lines of neat script in a dusty old book. And that really is the heart of the story. The event became what you might call a humble miracle. It wasn't a miracle of spectacle, designed to inspire awe and convert thousands. It was a miracle of conversation. For a few days in the deep midwinter of 1664, it broke the monotony of life in the monastery. It gave these devout and serious men something new and slightly unusual to discuss over their evening tea or watered wine. It sparked debates about physics, craftsmanship, and the small, unpredictable quirks of the material world. Think about it. In a life dedicated to the grand, eternal questions of the soul, this tiny, terrestrial mystery provided a moment of shared curiosity and grounded fellowship. It was a small deviation from the norm that made an otherwise ordinary Christmas memorable. The story wasn't about a supernatural event, but about how humans, even in the most disciplined of settings, find joy and connection in the unexpected. This tale has been passed down not as a testament to divine power, but as a charming historical footnote. It reminds us that history isn't just made up of battles and kings. It's also made up of the small, quiet moments that people thought were worth remembering. The scribe, Brother Anselm, probably didn't think he was recording a legend. He was just noting down an oddity, a little puzzle the universe had presented them with. Today, we might try to find a more definitive scientific explanation. We could analyze the air pressure, the humidity, the specific chemical composition of 17th century beeswax. We could run simulations. But doing so would kind of miss the point, wouldn't it? The beauty of the story isn't in solving the puzzle. It's in the image of the monks, their faces lit by the gentle, impossibly long-lasting flame, talking, wondering, and for a brief moment being united by a simple, burning candle. It's a reminder that sometimes the most meaningful events aren't the loud and dramatic ones, but the quiet ones that give us a reason to gather, to talk, and to wonder together. A small, stubborn flame that became a warm, gentle memory. Picture this. It's 1927. A small, snow-dusted town in Canada is buzzing with anticipation. Flyers have been posted all over, promising a Christmas parade filled with excitement and spectacle. The townsfolk, bundled up in their warmest coats and scarves, line the main road, their breath fogging in the crisp winter air. They're expecting something grand, something to break the monotony of the long, cold days. What they got, however, was something entirely different. The parade began not with a marching band or the jingle of sleigh bells, but with a quiet shuffle. It was a line of their very own neighbors, strolling down the street at a pace you could only describe as leisurely. Instead of magnificent floats, they held hand-painted banners. The colors weren't vibrant reds and greens, but rather mild, muted tones that almost blended in with the winter landscape. There were no prancing reindeer, no jolly Santa Claus on a sleigh, just people walking. Imagine the scene. A group of local merchants holding a sign that says, "Happy Holidays from the General Store." Then the baker and his family, carrying a banner that simply reads, "Season's Greetings." There was no music, no fanfare, just the soft crunch of boots on snow and the murmur of the crowd. The children, who were probably expecting candy and clowns, just stared, a little confused. The adults looked at each other, perhaps with a raised eyebrow or a hidden smile. This wasn't the excitement and spectacle they were promised. It was, for all intents and purposes, a group of people taking a collective walk down the main road. Yet something magical happened. As the last of the walkers passed by, the spectators started to clap. It wasn't a thunderous, roaring applause. It was a polite, gentle, and genuinely warm clap. In the days that followed, when people talked about the parade, the consensus was that it was fine. Now, fine might sound like a pretty lukewarm review, but in this small town, fine was actually high praise. It was an acknowledgement that someone had tried. In the middle of a long, isolating winter, their community had come together to do something, even if that something was just walking. The sheer, unadulterated simplicity of it all was what made it memorable. It wasn't trying to be something, it was honest, it was them. This parade of walking became an odd piece of local folklore. It wasn't remembered for being a failure, but for being a testament to community spirit in its purest form. It proved that you don't always need dazzling lights and loud music to create a cherished memory. Sometimes all you need is a group of people willing to show up for each other, even if it's just for a quiet stroll down the street. Over the years, the story was told and retold, each time with a little more fondness. It became a humorous, heartwarming tale about the time the town's grand parade was just a walk. The event took on a life of its own, a symbol of the town's humble and unpretentious character. It taught a valuable lesson. Joy isn't always found in spectacle. Often, it's found in the shared, simple moments. Think about our modern-day celebrations. We're so often caught up in making things bigger, better, and more Instagram-worthy. We put immense pressure on ourselves to create these perfect, spectacular experiences. But the story of this 1927 parade is a beautiful reminder that maybe we don't need all that. Maybe the real magic is just in the act of coming together. That simple, uneventful walk warmed the community spirit in a way a more elaborate parade might not have. When your expectations are modest and the winter is long, even the plainest of events can feel like a beacon of light. It's a celebration of effort, of participation, and of the quiet bond that holds a community together through the coldest of seasons. So next time you're replanning an event or feeling like your holiday celebrations are enough, remember the Christmas parade that was mostly walking. Remember that sometimes the most meaningful moments are the ones that are simple, sincere, and shared. It's a wonderful piece of history that shows us the true spirit of Christmas is in the spectacle, but in the heart. What do you think? Could a parade like this happen today? Let me know in the comments below. It's a story that really makes you appreciate the simple things in life. See you next time. Have you ever had one of those mornings where you wake up with a jolt, heart pounding, realizing you've massively overslept? It's a feeling of pure panic, right? Now, imagine if it wasn't just you, but your entire town that overslept. And not just on any random Tuesday, but on Christmas morning. This isn't a movie plot. It's a true story from a small rural parish in England, way back in 812. Let's set the scene. It's the early 19th century. Life is simpler, slower, and revolves around the seasons and the church. Christmas is the absolute pinnacle of the year, a day of profound religious significance and communal celebration. The morning service is the centerpiece of the entire day. For everyone in this quiet English parish, the signal to wake up, get dressed in their Sunday best. And head to church wasn't an alarm clock; those wouldn't be common for many more decades. It was the powerful, resonant toll of the church bell, a sound that had marked the rhythm of their lives for generations. On this particular Christmas morning in 1812, the air was crisp and still, likely dusted with a frost that made the countryside sparkle. Inside their cozy cottages, families slept soundly, dreaming of the day ahead. The bell ringer, a man with a duty as old as the village itself, made his way to the church in the pre-dawn chill. He was the town's official timekeeper, the one who called them to worship and to celebration. He arrived at the bell tower, took hold of the thick, familiar rope, and prepared to pull. This was a motion he knew by heart. He braced himself and gave it a mighty heave, expecting that deep, soul-stirring shbong to echo across the fields and through the shuttered windows of every home. But what he heard instead was a clunk, a weak, dull, apologetic little thud. It was a sound so pathetic it wouldn't have woken a light sleeper in the next room, let alone the entire parish. Confused, he tried again and again. He pulled and pulled, putting all his strength into it, but the great bell refused to sing. The mechanism had failed. The clapper just wasn't striking the bell with any force. The sound that was meant to herald the most important morning of the year was swallowed by the silence. After several frustrating attempts, the bell ringer had to accept the baffling truth: the bell was broken. On Christmas Day of all days, and so the parish slept on. The sun began to climb higher in the sky, casting long winter shadows. Inside their homes, people slumbered peacefully, completely unaware that the day had already begun without them. There were no frantic phone calls, no urgent text messages, just a profound, uninterrupted quiet. One can only imagine the scene. Families tucked in their beds, the fires in their hearths turned to embers, the whole community wrapped in a blanket of collective, blissful ignorance. Eventually, of course, people started to wake up, not to the call of the bell, but to the gentle prodding of their own internal clocks or the bright morning light filtering through their windows. The first person to stir probably thought they were just an early riser. They'd get up, start the fire, and wonder why the house was so quiet. Then, glancing at the sun's position, a slow dawning confusion would set in. Isn't it a bit late? One by one, and then in small, yawning groups, the townsfolk emerged from their homes. They blinked in the surprisingly bright morning light, looking around in a state of shared bewilderment. They saw their neighbors doing the same thing, stepping out onto the cobblestone paths, looking equally puzzled. Instead of the usual bustling activity of Christmas morning, there was a strange, sleepy calm. People started trickling towards the church, the natural meeting point for the community. The initial confusion soon gave way to amusement. A man would greet his neighbor with a sheepish grin. A woman would stifle a yawn and ask, "Did you hear the bell this morning?" The answer, of course, was a universal no. The story of the bell ringer's futile efforts spread quickly through the gathering crowd, and a wave of chuckles and good-natured laughter rippled through them. There was no panic, no anger. No one blamed the poor bell ringer, who was probably the most flustered person in the entire parish. Instead, there was a sense of shared, slightly absurd experience. They had all, together, overslept on Christmas. They arrived at the church not in a grand procession, but in a slow, staggered, and slightly disheveled parade. The minister, seeing his congregation finally assembling, didn't deliver a scolding sermon about tardiness. He simply waited. When enough people had gathered, still rubbing the sleep from their eyes, they all went inside. They shrugged, exchanged warm Christmas greetings, and held the service anyway, just a few hours later than planned. That day, the minister recorded the event in the parish records. He didn't write about a disaster or a failure. Instead, he described it as a peacefully delayed celebration. I just love that phrase. It captures the spirit of the day perfectly. Life had thrown them a curveball, a completely unexpected hiccup in their most cherished tradition. And their response wasn't frustration, but a calm, communal acceptance. This event became a piece of local folklore, affectionately known as the Christmas that started late. It was a story told for years, a fond memory of the time when the whole world, or at least their small corner of it, hit the snooze button. In an era where life was often hard and unforgiving, this small, shared mishap became a moment of unexpected grace. It makes you think, doesn't it? In our modern lives, we're so ruled by schedules, alarms, and deadlines. Oversleeping feels like a catastrophe, but for this little English parish in 1812, it was just a peaceful delay. It reminds us that sometimes the most memorable moments are the ones that don't go according to plan. It shows that community isn't about perfect timing. It's about coming together, even if you're all a little late and a little sleepy. So the next time you accidentally oversleep, maybe don't panic. Just take a breath, smile, and remember the year that an entire town overslept on Christmas. And no one particularly minded. It was just a different kind of perfect. Have you ever heard of the Great Pudding Shortage of 1737? No? Well, you're not alone. It's one of those historical footnotes that's so wonderfully ridiculous, it deserves its own moment in the spotlight. So grab a snack, maybe not a pudding just yet, and let's travel back to 18th century London. The year is 1737. The streets of London are bustling. Carriages clatter over cobblestones, vendors are shouting their wares, and the city is gearing up for its most cherished holiday, Christmas. Now, if there's one thing that defines a British Christmas, it's the pudding. Not the creamy, jiggly dessert you might be thinking of. We're talking about Christmas pudding or plum pudding, a dense, dark, boozy concoction packed with dried fruit, spices, and suet. It's a tradition steeped in history, a centerpiece of the festive feast. Making it was a ritual often started weeks, if not months, in advance. Families across the city are preparing for the holidays, and the air is filled with the scent of cinnamon, nutmeg, and a general sense of anticipation. But then a whisper starts. A tiny, almost insignificant rumor begins to snake its way through the city's markets and coffee houses. It's a terrifying prospect, a festive nightmare. The rumor? There's going to be a shortage. A catastrophic shortage of Christmas pudding. Imagine the scene. People stop in their tracks. Conversations halt. A Christmas without pudding? It was unthinkable. It would be like having a birthday with no cake, a summer with no sun. Panic, in a very polite, very British way, began to bubble just beneath the surface. Housewives clutched their purses a little tighter. Gentlemen in powdered wigs looked at each other with genuine concern. Was it true? Could the cornerstone of their Christmas dinner truly be in jeopardy? The rumor spread like wildfire, which in a city built largely of wood and coal, was a very familiar concept. It jumped from the bakeries of Cheapside to the grand homes of Mayfair. Every conversation seemed to touch on it. Did you hear? People would ask in hushed tones. No puddings this year? The potential crisis became the talk of the town. Newspapers, or what passed for them at the time gossip-filled pamphlets and broadsheets, might have even picked up the story, fanning the flames of public anxiety. So what was the source of this impending doom? Was it a failed crop of raisins from the continent? A blockade of sugar imports? A new tax on spices? The speculation ran wild. Perhaps pirates had seized a fleet of ships laden with precious currants and sultanas. Maybe a blight had destroyed all the suet-producing cattle in the country. The possibilities were as dramatic as they were terrifying. For a brief, tense period, the Christmas spirit of London hung precariously in the balance. People started to imagine a bleak, pudding-less future. A dry, joyless Christmas day with nothing to set on fire with brandy. A horror. But then, just as the collective panic was about to reach its peak, the truth came out, and the truth was, well, it was incredibly mundane. The great citywide catastrophe, the source of all this worry, was traced back to a single person. One baker, let's call him Thomas. Thomas was, by all accounts, a decent baker. He wasn't famous, he wasn't a royal supplier, he was just a regular guy with a small shop, known for being a bit of a worrier. He was an overcautious, meticulous man who took his pudding production very, very seriously. One afternoon, while taking inventory of his supplies for the Christmas rush, Thomas did his sums. He counted his bags of flour, his barrels of suet, his jars of spices, and finally his crates of raisins. And he miscounted. We don't know exactly how he messed it up. Maybe he was distracted, maybe his abacus was sticky, or maybe he just had a moment of pure mathematical confusion. Whatever the reason, his final tally of raisins was alarmingly low. In his mind, this wasn't just a personal problem. It was a citywide crisis in the making. If he, a humble baker, was short on raisins, surely everyone must be. He didn't stop to double-check his numbers. He didn't consider that maybe, just maybe, he was the only one with this problem. No, his anxious mind leaped to the most dramatic conclusion. He probably mentioned his discovery to a customer. Terrible news, he might have sighed, wiping flour from his brow. There's a great raisin famine upon us. The puddings are in peril. That customer told two friends, and they told two friends, and so on and so on. The story morphed and grew with each telling. Thomas's personal raisin miscalculation transformed into a national pudding apocalypse. When the real story finally emerged, the panic dissipated as quickly as it had arrived. Imagine the city's collective reaction. It wasn't anger. It wasn't outrage. It was a citywide, synchronized sigh of mild relief, followed by a bit of an eye roll. All that worry for nothing. The great pudding shortage was a complete fiction, a ghost story for gourmands, cooked up by one baker who couldn't count his fruit. The shortage, of course, never happened. Christmas 1737 arrived right on schedule, and the tables of London groaned under the weight of perfectly normal, slightly dense, and thoroughly raisin-filled puddings. The brandy was poured, the flames flickered, and everyone had a perfectly lovely traditional Christmas. The whole affair became a bit of a joke around the city. For a few years, people might have greeted each other with a wink and a quip. Got enough raisins for your pudding this year? Thomas the baker likely endured a fair bit of gentle ribbing from his customers and fellow merchants. But what's truly fascinating about this story isn't the panic itself, but how it ended. It was an anticlimax of epic proportions. And yet the story survived. It became a minor anecdote in the city's history, a quirky little tale passed down through generations. Why? Why do we remember a crisis that never was? I think it's because these kinds of stories are, in a strange way, comforting. They require very little emotional investment. There's no tragedy, no real villain, no lasting consequences. It's just a simple, silly story about human error and our tendency to jump to conclusions. It's easy to tell, easy to summarize, and always gets a little chuckle. It reminds us that sometimes the things we worry about the most turn out to be nothing at all. Think about it in today's terms. We live in an age of information overload where a single tweet or a sensational headline can spark global panic in minutes. We've seen it with rumored shortages of everything from toilet paper to gasoline. The Great Pudding Shortage of 1737 is like an 18th century version of a viral rumor gone wrong. It's a historical testament to the power of misinformation, but also to our ability to laugh at ourselves once the dust settles. It proves that people, whether in 1737 or today, are prone to a bit of festive hysteria. It also shows that deep down, we care a lot about our traditions, about the small, comforting rituals that make life feel normal and special. The thought of losing the Christmas pudding was genuinely upsetting to Londoners because it wasn't just about the dessert. It was about family, about continuity, about the very essence of the holiday. So, the next time you hear a wild rumor spreading, take a moment to think of our friend Thomas, the anxious baker of London. Remember that sometimes a global crisis is just one person who miscounted their raisins. The great pudding shortage that wasn't tea is a perfect little slice of history, a story not of disaster, but of a dodged bullet we never even knew was fake. It's a reminder that history isn't just made up of big battles and famous kings. It's also made of the small, funny, deeply human moments that reveal who we really are. Have you ever heard a story so quiet, so ordinary, that it becomes extraordinary? Today, we're traveling back in time to a tiny, snow-covered town in Norway. During the Christmas of 1904, it's a place where the houses huddle together for warmth, and the air smells of pine and wood smoke. This isn't a tale of grand adventure or dramatic events. Instead, it's the story of a snowman. A snowman so perfectly average, it almost faded into the background of history. But what made it special wasn't its appearance, but its incredible, stubborn refusal to disappear. Imagine the scene. Christmas has just passed. The festive cheer is starting to settle into the quiet rhythm of winter. Children, bundled up in thick woolens, had gathered in the town square to build a snowman. There was nothing remarkable about him. 2 pieces of coal for eyes, giving him a perpetually surprised look. A carrot for a nose, not too long, not too short, just right. And wrapped around his neck was a scarf, knitted from leftover yarn in a muddle of colors, a bit of red, a dash of blue, a thread of gray. He was the kind of snowman you'd see in any town, anywhere in the world where snow falls. He was simple, honest, and utterly forgettable, or so everyone thought. As the days turned into weeks, something strange, or rather not strange at all, happened. The snowman January arrived, bringing with it more snow and biting winds. Other, more elaborate snow creations in neighboring yards began to slump and shrink. A snow fort collapsed, a rather ambitious snow dragon lost its tail, but our snowman stood firm, his coal eyes staring out at the unchanging winter landscape. People would walk past him on their way to the market or the church. They'd glance over, maybe raise an eyebrow, and mutter to a companion, "He's still there." It wasn't a comment of amazement, more a simple statement of fact, like observing that the sky was gray. The children who built him had long since moved on to other winter games. They were more interested in sledding down the big hill or trying to skate on the frozen pond. The snowman became part of the town's furniture, as constant as the old clock tower or the ancient oak tree at the edge of the woods. He saw the new year come and go. He watched as the town celebrated birthdays and mourned losses. He stood silent witness to whispered secrets between friends and the laughter of families heading home after a long day. He wasn't a spectacle. He was a quiet companion to the town's daily life. February rolled in, a month known for its thaws and freezes. The sun, a little higher in the sky now, would occasionally peek through the clouds, casting a weak, watery light. The edges of the rooftops would drip, 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 creating tiny icicles that sparkled in the afternoon sun. Everyone expected the snowman to finally give in. You'd see his form soften just a little during the day, the lines of his round body becoming less defined. But then, as night fell and the temperatures plummeted, he would freeze solid again, his shape reasserting itself against the darkness. It was a slow, almost imperceptible dance with the changing seasons. He was losing, of course he had to lose eventually, but he was losing on his own terms with a kind of quiet dignity. The local postman, a fellow named Lars, probably knew the snowman best. Every day on his route, he'd pass the town square. At first, he barely noticed him, but by mid-February, Lars had developed a little ritual. He'd stop his cart, nod at the snowman, and say, "Still holding on, my friend." It was a one-sided conversation, but it felt right. The snowman, in his silent resilience, seemed to represent something about the town itself, its ability to endure the long, dark winters with patience and without complaint. He wasn't fighting the melt. He was just gracefully accepting his time. As March approached, the first real signs of spring began to appear. The snowbanks lining the streets grew gray and dirty. Patches of brown earth started to emerge, like islands in a sea of white. The air held a new scent, a damp, earthy smell that promised life and renewal. And now, the snowman's time was truly running out. His carrot nose had drooped, giving him a rather sad expression. His scarf, faded by the sun and weighed down by moisture, hung loosely around his shrinking neck. One of his coal eyes had slipped, giving him a comical, winking look. He was a shadow of his former, perfectly round self. The children, the ones who had brought him to life months ago, started to notice him again. But they weren't sad. Instead, they were fascinated by his slow, gentle departure. They'd gather around him after school, not to fix him, but to observe. They'd poke at his soft, slushy sides and watch as the water trickled down. He was no longer a static figure, but a living, changing part of their environment. He was teaching them their first gentle lesson about impermanence, about how all things, even things made of snow, have a season. Finally, one warm, sunny afternoon in late March, it happened. There was no dramatic collapse, no sudden puddle. The sun shone brightly, the birds were singing their first tentative spring songs, and the snowman gently receded back into the earth. By evening, all that remained was a damp patch on the ground, the 2 pieces of coal, the limp carrot, and the colorful, mismatched scarf. A few townspeople gathered around the spot. It wasn't a funeral, not really. It was more of a quiet acknowledgement, a nod of respect. Someone picked up the scarf and draped it over a nearby fence post where it fluttered in the breeze. The story of the slow-melting snowman of 1904 became a local legend. Not the kind that's written down in history books, but the kind that's passed down from grandparents to grandchildren on a cold winter's night. It wasn't a story about a magical snowman. It was a story about the beauty of the ordinary, about the quiet comfort of consistency in a changing world. That snowman, so unremarkable in his creation, became a symbol of endurance. He reminded the town that even in the longest, darkest winters, there is a quiet strength, a patient waiting for the spring. And that sometimes the most memorable things in life aren't the loud and spectacular events, but the quiet, steady presences that are just there until they aren't. It's a strange thing to think about, isn't it? A snowman becoming a tradition. The next winter, when the children built a new snowman in the square, they used the same colorful scarf. And the winter after that, and the one after that, they never expected him to last as long as the original, but the act of building him became a way to remember that one uneventful, yet unforgettable, winter. It was a tribute to the snowman who refused to melt, a celebration of one of the most uneventful, yet strangely comforting, moments in the town's memory. And it reminds us that sometimes the most enduring legacies are the ones that are the most gentle. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we diving into a story that's a little different from the usual tales of groundbreaking heroes or infamous villains. This is a story about being, well, just okay, and how sometimes just showing up is its own quiet form of greatness. Let's travel back to the mid-19th century, to a quiet, often damp corner of Kent, England. Imagine the scene. It's 1849. The world is bustling with the Industrial Revolution. Great thinkers are changing society and grand new buildings are scraping the sky. But in a small, unassuming town in Kent, something much less dramatic was happening, especially around Christmas time. Every single Christmas Eve, a small group of local residents would gather, lanterns in hand, ready to go caroling. They weren't a formal church choir, just a handful of neighbors who shared a love for the season. Let's call them the Kent Carollers. Now, when you think of historical carollers, you might picture angelic voices, perfect harmonies, and a performance that could move even the most stoic heart. The Kent Carollers were not quite that. Their singing wasn't bad, not at all. If you opened your door to them, you wouldn't be offended, but you also wouldn't be particularly moved. Their harmonies hovered in that strange space between pleasant and entirely forgettable. They weren't dissonant, but they certainly weren't transcendent. Their repertoire was just as predictable. They stuck to the classics. God rest the merry gentlemen. The first Noel. Hark! The herald angels sing. You weren't going to hear any new experimental arrangements or long-forgotten medieval hymns from this group. They knew what people expected, and they delivered exactly that, no more and no less. Their performances were the musical equivalent of a plain, but warm, wool blanket. It does the job, but no one's writing poems about it, so why are we even talking about them? Because this unremarkable group had one truly remarkable quality, their sheer, unwavering consistency. For years, every single Christmas Eve, they were there. It didn't matter if there was a light drizzle, a biting wind, or a thick blanket of fog rolling in from the countryside. While other, perhaps more talented, groups might cancel due to bad weather or lack of enthusiasm, the Kent Carollers would show up. They were punctual, they were polite, and they were always prepared to walk through a bit of mud to bring a little bit of festive cheer to their neighbors' doorsteps. They never sought fame or payment. They'd accept a warm drink or a mince pie if offered, but they were just as happy with a simple Merry Christmas before moving on to the next house. Their goal wasn't to put on a show-stopping performance. It was simply to participate in the tradition, to be a small, recurring part of their community's holiday experience. Year after year, the residents of their little corner of Kent could count on them. The sound of their approaching, perfectly average voices became as much a signal of Christmas Eve as the church bells. This quiet dedication went largely unnoticed for a long time. They were just part of the local scenery. But one year, a local historian, a man by the name of Arthur Gable, happened to be staying in the town over Christmas. He wasn't there to study music. He was documenting local customs and traditions for a county chronicle. On Christmas Eve, he heard the Carollers and, like everyone else, probably thought they were fine, but then he saw them again the next year and the year after that. Gable, being a man who appreciated patterns and records, started taking notes. He observed their unfailing punctuality, their polite demeanor, and their willingness to sing in weather that would send most people scurrying indoors. He realized he wasn't witnessing a display of great artistic talent, but he was witnessing a display of incredible character and reliability. In his local chronicle, which was published a few years later, he dedicated a small passage to them. He didn't praise their musical abilities. Instead, he gave them a title that is both slightly comical and deeply profound. He referred to them as the most consistent yet entirely unremarkable choir in the county. It wasn't a jab. It was a sincere observation. He wrote that while other choirs might offer a more celestial sound, none could match this group's steadfast commitment to the simple act of showing up. He noted that their presence was a comfort. In a world that was changing so rapidly, where old certainties were fading away, the reliable, predictable sound of the Kent Carollers was a small anchor. You knew they'd be there. You knew what songs they'd sing, and you knew they'd sing them with a quiet sincerity that was, in its own way, more touching than a flawless performance. Their legacy, therefore, isn't found in any recordings or concert programs. It's found in that single, peculiar entry in a dusty local history book. Their story isn't about achieving excellence. It's about the value of dependability. It's a reminder that not everyone has to be a star. Not every effort has to be a masterpiece. Sometimes the greatest contribution you can make is to be the person who always shows up. Think about it in our own lives. We often celebrate the brilliant, the innovators, the ones who shine the brightest. But what about the reliable friend who always answers the phone? The coworker who always meets their deadlines without any fuss? The family member who is always there, offering steady, quiet support? These are the unremarkable Carollers of our lives. Their greatness isn't loud or flashy, but it's real, and it's what holds our communities together. The story of the 1849 Kent Carollers is a tribute to the quiet heroes, the steady hands, the people who do the work, day in and day out, not for applause, but because it's what they do. Their harmonies may have faded into history, but their example of quiet greatness, of dependability as a virtue, is a song worth remembering. It teaches us that consistency can be its own form of brilliance, and that sometimes the most profound thing you can do is simply be there. Picture this: It's Christmas Eve, 1781, in a tiny, snow-dusted village nestled deep in the heart of Bavaria. The air is crisp, filled with the scent of pine and roasting chestnuts. Excitement is buzzing among the townsfolk. Why? Because this year, the village council has decided to do something truly spectacular to celebrate the holiday. They've commissioned a brand new, magnificent lantern to be lit in the town square. This wasn't just any lantern. Whispers had been circulating for weeks about its grandeur. It was said to be a masterpiece of engineering, a beacon of festive cheer that would illuminate the entire square with a warm, golden light. The mayor had given speeches about it, promising a sight that would be remembered for generations. The blacksmith, the carpenter, and the glazier had all been working tirelessly, their workshops glowing late into the night. The anticipation was palpable. People imagined a light so bright it would rival the stars, a glow so inviting it would draw everyone together in a perfect picture of holiday harmony. As dusk began to settle, families bundled up in their thickest wool coats and scarves, their breath fogging in the cold air. They crunched through the snow, making their way to the town square, their faces beaming with expectation. Children clutched their parents' hands, their eyes wide with wonder, eager to see this legendary lantern. The square was packed, a sea of expectant faces all turned toward the center, where a large, cloth-covered object stood, waiting to be unveiled. The village priest was there, ready to offer a blessing. The town choir was poised, ready to burst into a carol the moment the light flared to life. It was a scene straight out of a storybook. Finally, the moment arrived. The mayor, beaming with pride, stood beside the covered shape. He cleared his throat and delivered a short, triumphant speech about community, tradition, and the bright future of their little village, symbolized by this new lantern. With a dramatic flourish, he and the blacksmith pulled away the heavy canvas cloth. And there it was. It was large, very large. It was an ambitious construction of iron and glass, so heavy that it had taken 6 strong men just to hoist it onto its pedestal. But as the designated lamplighter carefully lit the wick inside, the crowd leaned in, their collective breath held. A flicker, then another, and then a light? Well, light might be a generous term. It was more of a suggestion of light. A hesitant, dim, yellowish glow that seemed to be struggling for its very existence. It managed to push back the darkness for, at best, a few feet. Anyone standing more than an arm's length away was still shrouded in the evening gloom. The grand beacon of Christmas cheer looked more like a weak firefly trapped in a very large jar. There was a moment of profound, collective silence. The choirmaster's hands, raised and ready to conduct, slowly dropped to his sides. The children blinked, looking from the feeble lantern to their parents, confusion written on their faces. Was this it? Was this the marvel they had heard so much about? The problem was threefold. First, the lantern was simply too heavy and over-engineered. The thick iron framework blocked most of the potential light. Second, the design was fundamentally flawed. The ventilation was so poor that the single, massive wick was constantly starved of oxygen, sputtering, and smoking. This led to the third problem. It got incredibly hot. The metal frame quickly became too hot to touch, and a faint, unsettling smell of scorched oil began to waft through the square. The mayor's proud smile faltered, replaced by a look of dawning horror. The blacksmith suddenly found the tips of his shoes to be the most interesting things in the world. The townsfolk, however, were a polite and gentle people. They looked at the sad, glowing orb. They looked at each other. Then, a few people at the front began to nod, slowly, politely. "Ah," one man said, loud enough for his neighbors to hear. "Yes, a lantern, indeed," a woman next to him agreed, pulling her shawl tighter. "It is functioning." Another man cleared his throat and offered his assessment. "Acceptable." And just like that, the tension broke. Acceptable became the word of the evening. People would walk up to the lantern, peer at it for a moment as if appreciating a fine work of art, nod thoughtfully and declare, "Quite acceptable." Then, they would turn to their neighbors, wish them a quiet Merry Christmas, and head home much earlier than planned. The grand celebration had fizzled out, not with a bang, but with a polite, collective shrug. You might think this story ends in disappointment, a failed attempt at holiday magic forgotten by time, but that's not what happened. The event was so uniquely underwhelming, so memorably mediocre, that it became a beloved piece of local folklore. The lantern was never lit again, of course. It was quietly dismantled and its parts repurposed. But it earned a legendary name in the village archives, Das technisch funktionierende Laternenlicht, or the lantern that technically functioned. Over the years, the story was told and retold, each telling adding a little more charm to the failure. It became a cherished reminder for the village. A reminder that things don't have to be perfect or brilliant to be memorable. Sometimes, the traditions that stick with us aren't the ones that go off without a hitch, but the ones that go wonderfully, comically wrong. It's the shared experience of that gentle letdown, the collective, polite agreement that something was acceptable that truly brought the community together. The story of the lantern that technically functioned became a symbol of the village's character. Humble, good-humored, and able to find joy not in spectacle but in shared moments. No matter how dimly lit, it teaches us a valuable lesson, especially around the holidays when we're all striving for perfection. We want the perfect tree, the perfect dinner, the perfect gift. But maybe the real magic isn't in the flawless execution. Maybe it's in the lopsided gingerbread house, the slightly burnt cookies, or the gift that wasn't quite right but was given with love. Those technically functioning moments are what make our own family histories unique and special. They are the stories we tell for years to come, laughing about how things didn't go as planned. The Bavarian villagers of 1781 accidentally stumbled upon a profound truth. A small, weak glow shared with others is far more meaningful than a brilliant light enjoyed alone. Not all traditions need to be dazzling to shine brightly in our memories. So this holiday season, if something doesn't go quite right, just smile, nod politely, and declare it acceptable. You might just be creating your own legendary tradition. Have you ever had a Christmas that was just fine? Not bad, not great, just okay? Well, today we're diving into a story that takes just fine to a whole new historical level. We're talking about the Christmas of 1623 in Plymouth Colony, an event so uneventful, it's actually kind of amazing. So, grab a snack, get comfortable, and let's travel back in time to experience the most perfectly average holiday in American history. Now, when you think of the Pilgrims in Plymouth, what comes to mind? Probably harsh winters, struggles for survival, maybe the first Thanksgiving. You picture dramatic scenes of hardship and resilience, right? Well, the winter of 1623 decided to take a different approach. Instead of a brutal, life-threatening blizzard, the weather was, well, it was winter. Just a regular, run-of-the-mill winter. Historians looking back at the records describe it as perfectly average. Snow fell, but not in dramatic, house-burying drifts. It was just enough to make things look pretty. The wind blew, but it wasn't a gale-force nightmare. It was just a bit chilly. The kind of wind that makes you pull your collar up but doesn't threaten to blow your hat to the next county. Life in Plymouth had certainly seen its share of drama. The first winter of 1620 was devastating, with nearly half the colonists dying from disease and starvation. The years that followed were a constant battle for survival. They were building a new society from scratch, facing unfamiliar territory, and dealing with all the uncertainties that came with it. So, by 1623, a little bit of boring was probably a welcome change. The colony had stabilized somewhat. They had managed to plant crops, build more permanent shelters, and establish a routine. The constant crisis mode was finally starting to ease up. So, as December 25th rolled around, what were the Pilgrims up to? Were they holding a grand feast, singing carols, and exchanging heartfelt gifts? Not exactly. Remember, these were devout Puritans. For them, Christmas was not the major holiday it is for us today. In fact, many Puritans viewed the celebration of Christmas with suspicion, associating it with pagan traditions and the excesses of the Church of England, which they had left behind. They believed that only the Sabbath, Sunday, was a day to be set aside for religious observance. So, for most of the colonists, Christmas Day was just another workday. Picture this. The sun rises on a quiet, moderately snowy Plymouth. Instead of the sound of church bells and joyous singing, you hear the rhythmic thud of a hammer against wood. You see colonists out and about, but they're not heading to a festive gathering. They're repairing fences that had been lightly damaged by the unremarkable wind. Inside the simple wooden houses, the air isn't filled with the scent of roasting goose and plum pudding. It's filled with the humble aroma of porridge, bubbling away in a pot over the fire. And what were the hot topics of conversation? Not tales of Christmas miracles or ghost stories. They were discussing practical, everyday matters. The big debate of the day might have been whether the new storage shed they were planning should be built a few feet wider to hold more grain. Thrilling stuff, I know. It was a day defined by duty, practicality, and a complete lack of festive fanfare. People went about their chores with a sense of quiet determination. They were focused on the long-term survival and success of their community, and that meant every day was a day to work. There was no grand drama, no holiday crisis, no last-minute search for a missing ingredient for a special meal. It was, in every sense of the word, just another Tuesday. But amidst this sea of normalcy, one man was about to make history without even trying. His name was Elias Morton. We don't know a ton about Elias other than that he was one of the settlers and, crucially for our story, he kept a diary. Diaries were common at the time, a way to record events, reflect on one's faith, and to document the challenges of life in the New World. Most diary entries from this period are filled with notes about hardships, prayers for deliverance, or observations about the land and their progress. But Elias Morton's entry for December 25, 1623, was different. As he sat down to write, probably by the light of a simple candle, he reflected on the day. He thought about the fence mending, the porridge stirring, the shed planning. And what profound, dramatic conclusion did he come to? He wrote that the day was adequately pleasant. Let that sink in. Not wonderful, not joyful, not even good. Adequately pleasant. It's the kind of phrase you might use to describe lukewarm soup or a movie you don't regret watching but will forget by tomorrow. It is the gold standard of faint praise. This single, simple entry, buried in a personal diary, would go on to become famous centuries later. Why? Because it perfectly captured the spirit of that day. It wasn't famous for what happened, but for what didn't happen. It became known among historians as quite possibly the least eventful Christmas note ever recorded in early American history. Think about the context. These people had endured unimaginable suffering. They had crossed an ocean, lost loved ones, and faced starvation. For them, a day without disaster, a day where the biggest problem was the dimensions of a new shed, was a victory. An adequately pleasant day was a blessing. It meant nobody was sick. It meant there was enough food. It meant the colony was secure. In a life defined by extremes, a day of pure, unadulterated mediocrity was a sign of success. It was a quiet sigh of relief, a moment of peace in a world that had been anything but peaceful. This story of the extremely mild Christmas has a charm all its own. It reminds us that history isn't just made up of big battles and dramatic turning points. It's also made up of countless, quiet, normal days. It's the sum of all the fences mended, the porridge stirred, and the sheds planned. These are the moments that build a society, that lay the foundation for the future. Without these adequately pleasant days, the more dramatic moments of survival wouldn't have been possible. It also puts our own holiday expectations into perspective, doesn't it? We often feel this immense pressure to have the perfect Christmas. The perfect decorations, the perfect gifts, the perfect family photo where everyone is smiling and no one is arguing. We see these idealized versions of the holidays on social media and in movies, and we feel like we're failing if our own celebration doesn't measure up. But the story of Plymouth in 1623 tells us something different. It tells us that maybe, just maybe, adequately pleasant is more than enough. Maybe a quiet day, free from drama and filled with simple comforts, is its own kind of holiday magic. The legacy of Elias Morton's diary entry is a testament to the beauty of the mundane. It's a historical inside joke, a nod to the fact that even the most resilient and historically significant people had days that were just okay, and that's fine. It makes them more human, more relatable. We can imagine Elias after a long day of chores, feeling a quiet sense of satisfaction. The fences were stronger, the porridge was warm, and the future of the storage shed was secured. It was, all things considered, an adequately pleasant day. And in the grand, often brutal story of early America, that was something worth writing down. So, the next time you're feeling a little underwhelmed by your holiday season, or maybe life in general just feels a bit average, remember the Christmas of 1623, remember Elias Morton and his legendary diary entry. Take a moment to appreciate the absence of disaster, the comfort of routine, and the simple joy of a day that is, for all intents and purposes, adequately pleasant. Because sometimes the most memorable moments in history are the ones where absolutely nothing memorable happened at all.